United States. Otherwise, John Adams will look from heaven and he will be regretting that he sacrificed so much for us to have the liberty that we're squandering. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Horsford of Nevada for today.
Without objection, the request is granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my privilege to be recognized by you here on the floor of the House of Representatives. It's my privilege to follow the gentleman from Texas in an address to you as we close out this legislative week, and a lot of the members are on their way to the airport or at the airport now, going back to serve their constituents. I'll be there myself, and I trust Mr. Gohmert will be too. I wanted to come to the floor and talk about this country that we have, this civilization that we have, the foundations of our civilization, and what's required to retain them and enhance them and move this country beyond the shining city on the hill and to a place beyond there, onward and upward. Ronald Reagan often described the shining city on the hill. He described it as America that is, an America that was and an America that is. And we were always challenged by the dream, but he didn't actually articulate, that I recall, something beyond this shining city. But societies must progress, and those that progress the most effectively and those that can be sustained the longest need to be built upon solid pillars. The shining city on the hill, standing true and strong on a granite ridge, was built on a solid foundation. And I argue that the foundation of it are the pillars of American exceptionalism. And those pillars are listed in the Bill of Rights, and you add to that free enterprise capitalism, Judeo-Christian values, the foundation of our culture, which welcomes all religions. And on top of that, the dream that inspired legal immigrants to come to America, and that dream embodied within the vision of the image of the Statue of Liberty. That's the American dream. That's the American country that we are. And that's the foundation upon which we've got to build our American future. But how did we get here? What was the reasons that these pieces came together? How was it our founding fathers came to a conclusion that we would have freedom of speech, religion, assembly, the right to keep and bear arms, freedom of the press, that we would have property rights, that we would have Fourth Amendment rights against search and seizure, unreasonable search and seizure, that we would not have to face any kind of jury but a jury of our peers, and that we would not suffer double jeopardy, and that justice would be blind, and every person would stand before the law treated equally. The Lady Justice, the statue we see of Lady Justice, holding the scales of justice perfectly balanced, is almost always shown to us blindfolded, because justice is blind. But justice is not a feeling. Justice is something that has to be delivered by the law. These are pillars of American exceptionalism, as are those rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution, that devolve to the states or the people, respectively to the states or the people. Those enumerated powers that we have are for Congress, or there are some delegated to the presidency, the executive branch, and we have the judicial branch of government. All of this is laid out as foundations that have been, although they've been altered to some degree over the years, we have adapted to those principles more often than we've altered our constitutional principles, because our founding fathers got it right. Now, where did that come from? How could it happen that these founding fathers could come together on what was an obscure place on the planet and get these ideas so well articulated that they could be the foundation of the greatest nation the world has seen, the strongest economy the world has seen, the most dominant culture and civilization the world has seen, the furthest reach in our economy, the furthest reach in our influence strategically? How did this all happen? And I would take you back, Mr. Speaker, to think a little bit about the formation of, I'll say, modern history. And I'd take you back to Mosaic law, before the time of Christ, when Moses, who looks down upon us right now, the only face that is looking directly at us from all of these faces of law providers in history, Moses looks down over this chamber in full-faced form. And he's looking back here, and he sees, as we should see, "In God we trust," our national motto. How did that come together, Mr. Speaker? It was when Moses came down from the mount with the law, God's law, and the foundation of that law, the way it was separated out through the tribes and the way the law and way justice was delivered, emerged out of Mosaic law and appeared also in Greek law. And as the Greeks, masterful people as they were shaping the age of reason. So we had Mosaic law that informed the Greek age of reason, and the age of reason where I imagine that Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and other philosophers sat around and challenged each other intellectually like gunslingers did in the West with guns. They did it with their brains. And young philosophers would go up to Socrates and challenge him with their philosophy, and Socrates would take it apart because he was the top guy. And he informed others. But as they were proud and prideful of their ability to reason in the culture of Greece at the time, they had to infuse Mosaic law to uphold their rationale. And some of them, as they voiced Mosaic law, were teased by other Greeks that said, "Well, you got that from Moses." But my point in this is that as civilization is progressing, Mosaic law came down from the mount, was handed to civilization. It emerged through the Greek civilization as the Greeks were developing their age of reason, and we're talking about the foundation of Western civilization. And almost concurrently with that, Roman law was emerging as well. Now I'll take you then to the time of Christ. Christ taught us our values of, the very values of repentance and redemption that didn't exist in a form before then. And that's his gift to us. But I make this point as talking about the law, and it is this. Now think of Mosaic law coming down, being infused within the Greeks, transferred also to the Romans. Roman law ruled over that part of the world when Christ stood before the high priest Caiaphas. And if you remember, Mr. Speaker, the high priest said to Jesus, "Did you really say those things? Did you really preach those things?" And Jesus responded to the high priest, as the Jews were watching, he said, "Ask them. They were there. They can tell you." That was, Mr. Speaker, the assertion by Jesus that he had a right to face his accusers. That principle remains today in our law, that we have a right to face our accusers. And when he said, "Ask them, they were there, they can tell you," he's facing his accusers and demanding that they testify against him rather than make allegations behind his back. And what happened when Jesus said that? They believed, and the high priest believed, that Jesus' answer was insolent. And the guard struck Jesus. And Jesus said, "If I speak wrongly, you must prove the wrong. If I speak rightly, why do you punish me?" He asserted his right to be innocent until proven guilty before a Roman court. Those two principles remain today in our law. A right to face your accuser, innocent until proven guilty. You face that jury of your peers, as I said. You need a quick and speedy trial. They didn't have to wonder about that in those days. It happened quickly, and the punishment came quickly as well, right or wrong. This foundation of law was wrapped up in Roman law, and it was spread across Western Europe as the Romans occupied areas like Germany, England, as we know it today, on into Ireland. And when the Dark Ages came, when the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 AD, then we saw civilization itself tumble and crumble, and we saw the heathens break down anything that represented the old culture, actually anything that represented real civilization. And while that was going on, they were tearing buildings into rubble, they were burning anything that was written documents. While that was going on, the priests and let me say, the descendants of the disciples of Christ began to gather up any paper and documents they could get their hands on. Some went to Rome to be secured and replicated by the monks and the scribes there. A lot went to Ireland, and an island off of Ireland, where the monks and the scribes replicated those documents there. That was the foundation of the relearning of a civilization. A civilization that had been lived for centuries, having lost the ability to reason. That age of reason that they were so proud of in the time of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle was lost to civilization for centuries, as people just lived by instinct and didn't leave much of a record of their rationale and didn't develop science, technology, or thought. And at a certain time, this information that was preserved in the documents of the classics, both biblical and religious information, and any document that the monks and scribes could get their hands on, they preserved. And they analyzed it, and they studied it, and they took a continent and taught that continent how to think. As the church emerged from Rome and from the St. Patrick's side of this thing out of Ireland, they built monasteries across the continent, and they were the centers of knowledge. And they began to educate the classical information that they had preserved primarily from the Roman, but also the Greek era. And they re-educated an entire civilization and recreated civilization based on what? Judeo-Christian values, the age of reason, and that reason that tied the values of faith together with the values that will allow for science to be developed. And that brings us to that year, let's say the years as emerging from the Middle Ages, and Martin Luther then stepped onto the scene in the 16th century and brought us, on top of that, the Reformation period, where he made the point that cast across the globe that you can honor God in a lot of ways, but you can do so. A mother changing a baby's diaper honors God more than 1,000 rote prayers that you don't give meaning from your heart into. And so the Protestant work ethic got added to all these values that I've added together. And the competition between the Protestant and the Catholic Church within Christianity ended up, it was rough and it was brutal, but the effect of it on our civilization and our society has been good, because the competition that drove from that made us all better. And each religion drew from the other. And by the way, the Eastern Church was separated when the Turks sacked Constantinople. And so the Eastern Orthodox and Russian Orthodox were separated, and they evolved in a little bit different way. But we're tied together. We're tied together culturally. We're tied together historically. We're tied together by our common humanity and our belief in, and this is the unique component, their belief in redemption. These attributes that I've discussed now, they're embodied within the Western Europe as we emerge into as we had emerged into the age of discovery, meaning Christopher Columbus and the explorers that came over here to the Western Hemisphere, that component, as well as a little bit later, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Well, think about where we are here in America. We are the recipients of some of the wisest, most analytical people that the world has ever produced, our founding fathers. They are a product of a culture and a civilization that believed in Adam Smith's free enterprise and the rights to property, and they believed they were free men, that they were free. In fact, they said so in the Declaration of Independence when Jefferson wrote in the Declaration, "A prince who exhibits the characteristics of a tyrant is unfit to be a ruler of a free people." A free people. They saw themselves as a free people before the Declaration. They didn't become necessarily free people as a product of, although they certainly had to earn it. They declared their freedom from England, but they saw themselves as free people before they issued the Declaration of Independence. But that brings us now to July 4, 1776. And they brought this history around for, what would it be, a couple thousand years or a little bit more than 2,000 years. And on this continent now we have the wisdom of the Founding Fathers. I believe they were inspired by God, and that it was by divine guidance that the Declaration was written. But it arrives here with what? These rights that we have. Freedom of speech, religion, the press and assembly, the right to keep and bear arms, the balance of these rights from the judicial side of it, the property rights in the Fifth Amendment, the devolution of power down to the people or the states. All of this landed on a continent with unlimited natural resources, so we believed at the time. All of these rights, free enterprise, strong Judeo-Christian faith and values, the reason many came here, unlimited natural resources, and a concept of manifest destiny. Now, who could create a giant petri dish that's so robust that it could settle a continent in the blink of an historical eye and leave such a foundation for the growth of population and the image and the inspiration of faith and freedom. Who could do that? Not man, but the entity that shaped their movements and their thoughts. And so here we are, the recipients. God-given liberty, defined in the Declaration. Should be inarguable, should be unchallengeable. I think it is. But we're a nation that cannot be reverse engineered and come up with a better result. We're a nation that has components of American exceptionalism, pillar after pillar of American exceptionalism, none of which can we pull out from underneath the edifice of this shining city on the hill and expect that this shining city would not collapse. Yes, it would. And so what is our charge here? It's not as hard as the charge of our founding fathers. It's not as hard as those that picked up their muskets and marched into the Redcoats' muskets in the Revolution. It's not as hard as the blue and the gray that clashed all over the battlefields here in this country and put an end to slavery and reunified this country. It's not as hard as the doughboys that marched off to war. It's not as hard, certainly, as those 16 million Americans that put on uniforms to defend our country in the Second World War. Certainly not as hard for us as the 450,000 who gave their lives during that war. It's not as hard either as those that marched off to Korea and are honored down here in their memorial, the memorial that says on the slab in front of them, "Our nation honors the men and women who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met." None of what we're charged with right now is that hard. And yet, some despair. And some think that we can create this new America that is not tied to the pillars of American exceptionalism. We can sacrifice some of those principles and we'll still be a country okay because we've got some political pressure that says we should sacrifice this principle or we should chisel away some pieces out of this beautiful marble pillar of American exceptionalism. Imagine what it would be like. What if this Congress, or this culture, which directs this Congress, what if we decided you're going to have limited speech, certain things you can't say, and we'll give you the list of words that you can't utter, because if you do that, you're going to be violating somebody's sense of political correctness. What if we said that you can assemble, but we're going to diminish your right to assemble because sometimes we disagree with what comes out of those meetings? You know, the Greeks did that. They had meetings in their city-states, and they would, if you remember the Greek blackball system that they had, the demagogues would emerge. People that could step up before the masses in Greece and the city-state and issue a speech that was rhetorically so inspiring that the Greeks marched off in what turned out to be the wrong direction. And what would they do? They would label him a demagogue. They would bring the demagogue before the city-state, and then they would excoriate him. And then they would have a vote. And it's like the Greek system today. 2 gourds, 2 marbles, 1 black one, 1 red one. They called them balls, of course. And as each of the Greeks walked through, they would have a white one and a black one. They would drop their voting ball in 1 gourd, and they would drop their discard ball in another gourd. And if the demagogue got 3 black balls, he was banished from the city-state for 7 years. That's how they muzzled the people that led them in the wrong direction with emotional rhetoric. But can you imagine if we did that? If America would banish people into the hinterlands for let's say, giving a speech that was disagreed with by 3 people. That's all it took, 3. They were restrained, of course, because they didn't want to be the next one banished. But that was the system. We're not going to limit freedom of speech in this country. And we're not going to limit freedom of assembly. We're not going to say you can't get together and talk about these things, because we know that in open public discourse and dialogue, what emerges from that are, we believe, in this reason that we've inherited from the Greeks and other civilizations, that what will emerge is the most logical, rational policy. That's what I'm advocating for, Mr. Speaker. I want the most logical, rational policy. And I think we need a policy that's right for America. I have an obligation to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and represent my constituents and represent my state and represent my country. And all of those things should be compatible with each other, and I believe they are. and I've not found myself in a conflict here between them. So I suggest that we have open dialogue, we have open debate. I challenge this civilization to be reasonable, have reason, be analytical, be a critical thinker. We send our kids off to school, and sometimes they're just taught a mantra, but they're not taught to take ideas apart and understand the components of them and put them back together. Well, I've just taken America apart and described some of its essential components, history apart, and put it back together, Mr. Speaker, and hopefully inform this body of some of the principal reasons why America is such a great nation. We're a great nation because we have God-given liberty. We would not be a great nation if we didn't exercise those God-given liberties. If we don't have access to those rights, if we don't put our positions out there in front of the public and challenge the people in this country to analyze those alternatives, what if we went down one path? What if some leader from on high, let's just say King George, not Prince George today, but King George, what if he decided we're going to go down this path and no one shall discuss anything outside of this line that I've described for you? What kind of a country would we be? Would we believe that one mortal individual can chart a path for this country superior to the collective wisdom of 316 million people? I don't think so, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think thinking Americans will either. But I know that this country is full of emotionalism. And as I watched the reactions to the George Zimmerman trial and verdict, I saw a lot of people who simply denied the facts that had been proven in law and seemed to be incapable of considering anything that didn't concur with their conclusion that they had drawn before they saw the facts. Now, I engage in this debate. I challenge people to debate with me because I believe one of two things. If I can't sustain myself in debate, I need to go get some more information. I need to get better informed. Or could it be that I'm wrong? Only two alternatives can come from not being able to sustain yourself in a debate, and I'll go back and get all the information that I can get, but I'll also reconsider. And anybody should. That's why I challenge people to debate. I'll take it up, and we will see who can sustain themselves. We may not get this all resolved in one discussion. In fact, in this Congress, it's been a very rare thing over the last 10-plus years that I've been here to see anybody stand up and admit, I was wrong, what you said changes my position, what I learned changes my position. No, there are too many egos involved in this Congress for that to happen very often. It'll happen a little bit privately, it'll happen incrementally, but it doesn't happen publicly unless there's some kind of leverage brought to bear. So here's my point, Mr. Speaker, and that is this. Our southern border is porous. It's not as porous as it was 7 or 8 years ago, mainly because the economy has grown in Mexico at about twice the rate that it's grown in the United States over the last 4.5 or 5 years. We don't have as much pressure on our border. But I can tell you this, 80 to 90% of the illegal drugs consumed in America come from or through Mexico. I can tell you that in Mexico, they are recruiting kids to be drug smugglers. Between the ages of 11 and 18, they have arrested and I believe incarcerated, and the number of convictions, that actually may be the number of convictions, but it's at least this, over 800 per year over the last couple of years at that ratio of those who are kids who are smuggling drugs into the United States. We pick up some on our side of the border, that adds to that number. The ones we catch, many get away. Every night, some come across the border, smuggling drugs across the border. Increasingly, the higher value drugs, heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine in some form or another, are being strapped to the bodies sometimes of young girls, teenage girls. The media is replete with this. Anybody that reads the paper should know, especially those that live on the border, should know that there are many, many young people coming across the border unlawfully who are smuggling drugs into the United States. They should also know that now the drug cartels, and I mean specifically the Mexican drug cartels, have taken over drug distribution in most of the major cities in America. I think Intel will tell you every major city in America. And the numbers that I've seen go from a little over 200 cities in the country to 2,000. I don't know what population that dials it down to or what areas. I haven't seen the map. But it should be appalling to a country and a civilization to see that that's taken place. When you understand that according to the Drug Enforcement Agency, of every chain of illegal drug distribution we have in the country, They will tell you, at least privately, as they have to me on multiple occasions, that at least one link are illegal aliens that are smuggling drugs into the United States. It's important that we know that as a Congress, as a country, as a civilization. If we deny those facts, if we deny the information that comes even out of the Obama administration that certainly supports those, if you deny the information that comes out through the major media that's there, if you deny what we're told by our law enforcement officers on the border of the United States that are continually interdicting drugs at about the same rate that they did those 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, when the population of illegal was flowing over the border at a faster rate than it is today, the illegal drugs coming across the border are roughly similar to that time. That says there is still a high demand in the United States. A high demand means drugs are likely to come in. If we are enforcing our borders and tightening down security, the price of drugs should go up. If you look at the price of drugs, I think you're going to find that we haven't been very effective in interdicting drugs coming across our southern border. Part of that is because they find new ways to smuggle, and some of those reasons are because kids are being used to smuggle drugs into the United States. That's appalling to me. The death across the Arizona border, it's still there. It happens this summer. And this debate taking place now in the middle of the summer, it's going to end up with more people being found out there on the desert in the brush who have lost their lives trying to get into the United States of America. We need a secure border. We need to build a fence, a wall, and another fence. So we've got 2 patrolling zones. We need to put the sensory devices on top of there. We need to use our boots on the ground in the most effective way possible. No nation should have an open borders policy. No nation should have a blind eye policy towards the enforcement of the laws. No nation can long remain a great nation if they decide to sacrifice the rule of law on the altar of political expediency. No nation like the United States of America can continue to grow and be a strong nation if we are going to judge people because they disagree with our agenda rather than the content of their statement. We have to be critical thinkers. We have to be analytical. We should understand facts from emotion. And let's pull together. Let's understand that we do have compassion. We do have compassion for every human person deserves dignity. We need to treat them with that warmth, treat them with that love as the American people always have, just like the Korean War veterans did when they gave themselves for a country they never knew and a people they never met. But we must not sacrifice the rule of law on the altar of political expediency. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House do now adjourn.
The questions on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
The House wrapping up work for the week, earlier today approving a bill that would limit the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate coal ash, giving states more control over management of the coal combustion product. Coal ash, which is commonly used in cement and asphalt, can also pose health concerns when not properly stored and managed. The bill next heads to the Senate. The House returns on Tuesday and will begin work on a bill to fund transportation and housing programs. Also on the agenda, a bipartisan compromise bill to address the doubling of student loan interest rates. The latest version of the bill was approved by the Senate yesterday on a vote of 81 to 18. Watch the House when members return Tuesday at noon Eastern for speeches, 2 p.m. for legislative work. Earlier today, House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi held her weekly briefing. She spoke about yesterday's vote, where the House narrowly blocked an amendment by Michigan Representative Justin Amash that would have limited the NSA phone and data collection program. We'll show you her briefing first, and then the briefing by House Speaker John Boehner.